I interviewed Shane Jennings during the week about the Super Bowl, which is on tonight. He's a really big American football fan, as are a few of the Irish rugby players. And he was saying that at the start of every year they put a few bets on amongst themselves to as regards who's going to win the whole thing. But what usually ends up happening is Brian O'Driscoll swans in, doesn't have a clue about the sport, and ends up winning the entire pot. Some guys have all the luck. With me in studio today, a couple of big American football fans themselves, Paul Galvin and Eddie O'Sullivan. Lads, thanks very much for coming in. Paul Kimmage, you're a bit grouchy, I think, about the whole Super Bowl thing, but we'll try and turn you by the end of the programme tonight.
I'm just with Brian O'Driscoll on this. I just waltz in, and if it's on, I'll watch it. If it's not, I won't bother.
Try and win a bit of cash on it. Tell us what's in the newspapers this morning.
Yeah, a couple of columns actually caught my eye this morning. The first from John Green in the Sunday Independent. John does some very good work on the coalface of Irish sport, and his column this morning is about attitudes in the GAA to violence. Attitudes must alter from the ground up is the headline. He opens with a story from the Heineken Cup 2 weeks ago, and an incident towards the end of that game when the referee Dave Pearson reversed the penalty he had awarded to Ulster, because the Ulster captain Johan Muller had suggested that not only should he have had a penalty, but the Cameron player should have been sin-binned. Now, this is what John says about it. Pearson's decision was critical. It may be argued that it was an excessive punishment on Ulster in the circumstances, an overt and unnecessary display of authority by a referee. But it was a reminder of the attitude in rugby that no matter how high the stakes, indiscipline won't be tolerated. Now, a day after that game, of course, was the All-Ireland Club Junior semi-final down in Portlaoise, which generated huge headlines all week. But as John says here, the row in itself wasn't the real story. While the focus in the aftermath has primarily been on the punishments meted out, surely it is of more importance for the GAA to start looking seriously at the underlying instances, such as the one in Portlaoise. And those underlying causes have little or nothing to do with a north or south divide or a Kerry-Tyrone rivalry or anything else which happened on the day. Ultimately, it boils down to tolerance and respect, two traits far more prevalent in rugby, for example, than Gaelic football. Now, he goes on to say that the punishment should be more severe, and then he makes what for me is the critical point. And I quote, "Despite huge advancements in recent years in Irish sport, including the GAA, there is still a big question mark over the conduct of adults, either directly involved with or on the periphery of underage teams. Too often they," this is the kids, "are corrupted by adult behaviour at games, including dishonesty, abuse of referees, intimidation, even physical violence. Essentially, they are indoctrinated into a win-at-all-cost philosophy which places the emphasis on taking shortcuts to success at the expense of discipline and even integrity." Paul, I don't know if you can identify with or if you agree with any of those points, but I know we've had Sean Cavan in here a few weeks ago, and he told us an absolutely horrific story of a game when he was 16.
He was under 16, he was assaulted by fully grown adults who struck him from behind at half time.
In the back of the head when he was only 16. Now, as an adult, if I was there, as a parent rather, if I was there and that was my son, I'd say probably the last game he would play. I'm not sure, what do you think?
I had a similar experience actually when I was a young fella. The guy gave me guy came in from the sideline, gave me a bit of a punch in a club game. I was around the same age, 16, 17, playing a senior game. I think it's difficult to differentiate between violence in GA and violence anywhere else. I think in itself it's a problem, I suppose, outside of sport as well. I would agree with the fact that I think there is more respect and more tolerance in the game of rugby than there is in the GA, be it towards referees or between opponents. I think it does. It's something I admire a lot about rugby, but I think referees in rugby also are much more communicative, and that is a huge factor in terms of that's a reason for tolerance, between players and the referee. But I like violence in the GA. I think it's no different to violence in soccer. You saw what happened in Egypt during the week. It's a kind of a deeper issue, I think, really more so than looking at referees' parts in it, or players' parts in it, or supporters' parts in it. I think it's a kind of a more holistic approach you'd have to take.
But what about his central point here, that really ultimately the solution starts at the ground? You've got to work from the ground up. You've got to work from club games up, from kids, and the way that you know, parents or coaches too often, in my view, run onto the pitch or start, you know, harassing the referees, you know, when they should let the kids just get on with it. Just that, you know.
Yeah, well, that's very apparent in GA. It is very apparent. A lot in GA.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do about it? I don't know. It's an amateur association, so you've got to expect amateur behaviour, I suppose, at times, you know. But I certainly see quite a bit of it. And at times you'd wonder, I see it at club games, club situations more so. You don't really see it at inter-county level, but certainly at club situations, you know, you'd be left shaking your head at times at the level of just the level of indiscipline, you'd have to say, on the sidelines particularly. And I find when it happens on the sideline, it certainly feeds into on the field. And it can certainly throw players off. It annoys me if I see our sideline, we'll say, with my club, getting on the case of referees or opponents or the opposition dugout or whatever. It does annoy me.
Would you say to them, Paul? Would you?
I have done, yeah. I have done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it does affect players, I think. No, it doesn't happen. I don't really give all up my own club, it doesn't happen all that. But yeah, it certainly has an effect on players, and it can breed onto the field. It can certainly breed onto the field. So it's a matter of responsibility, I suppose, but it's a difficult thing to try and address.
Absolutely, I was going to say, well, how do you address it?
It's almost. I don't really know where you would
so
start.
deeply ingrained.
Very deeply ingrained, you see, and that's what I'm trying. It is really it's a difficult one to try and address, I think, you know.